I'm really grateful, Mr. Chairman, here, and to the Nuffield Board for the great honour they do me in inviting me to deliver this George Wilson Oration. It really is a task and a privilege that ought to be falling to your present chair, Terry Care. Terry came over to tell me, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this comment too late now, Terry, how he'd been at a farmers' meeting in Shepparton, and using the opportunity, as your chair always does, to promote Nuffield, he was talking about Nuffield as he sat down back at the table. A young man on the other side of the table said, "Oh, interested in your comments about Nuffield because I know a bit about it myself." So he said, "Oh yes, who are you?" He said, "I'm one of George Wilson's sons." And he said, "I know how committed George was to Nuffield. When in '73 he picked up the role of being Australian president, chair, and needed then to find the resources to back Australian scholars because the funding that had come from the UK had dried up. He said, 'Dad, we had one year when Dad was not home for 1 weeknight because of the time he spent finding resources for Nuffield.' This organisation owes a great deal to George Wilson. And I thought, as I was part of the audience today listening to the scholars, how proud George would be of what has happened to Nuffield. He was just something, so I'll comment out there in a moment. But how proud he would be of the organisation and the way in which Nuffield is now bringing, instead of 3 scholars in my day in 1975, now sending up to 20 scholars overseas, and how, as is often the case tonight, the standard has simply continued to rise with the numbers. I found it a bit sobering for Nuffield scholars in 2012, and particularly the 2013 ones that are here. I noted that John Woodhead said that he thought that many of them had been born, many of them hadn't been born when he did his Nuffield scholarship. Well, George, I did, like John, I did mine in 1975, and I sat there thinking a whole lot of you were only toddlers when I was overseas, and some of you little more than a glint in your dad's eye. I stand here as someone who would not have been the member for Wakefield if I had not had the opportunity to do a Nuffield scholarship. I say that with conviction. One, because I won pre-selection by 1 vote, and it doesn't get much tighter than that. And secondly, because I was always conscious that I was in fact extraordinarily, no credit to me, in an exercise that will never be repeated. I am the 3rd member for Wakefield to have been a Nuffield scholar. The inaugural Nuffield scholar, Bert Kelly, and more comments about Bert a little later. The inaugural, his son Tim, and Marilyn here of course, the inaugural Nuffield scholar in 1950 was Bert Kelly, who became a member for Wakefield. Geoffrey O'Halloran Giles, the 1956 Nuffield scholar, followed Bert, and then I had the opportunity to follow Jeff. I can tell you that as a member for Wakefield, I used to keep a very close eye on Brendan Smart, and on David Shanahan, and on Kim Kelly, because I thought I'm not that anxious to have 4 members for Wakefield, or at least not until I'm ready to retire. I want to open tonight by telling you a true story. In the year 2000, when I was fortunate enough to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Carol and I were invited to the Freeling Anglican Church Centenary. Now, as David can tell you, Freeling just sits on the edge of the Barossa Valley. And the Anglicans had a bit of a challenge there because this was before the ACCC, and the Lutherans had well and truly outmanoeuvred them in the marketplace. And so the Freeling Anglican Church was a relatively small church. And as their guest this 100th anniversary, they had Bishop Keith Rayner, who had previously been the Archbishop and had just retired. Bishop Rayner did a superb job of conducting the service, as he invariably would. He was dressed in all of his Anglican finery. And at the close of the service, the Freeling people very generously waited for him to walk down the aisle and step outside this little church into the sun. And then they were kind enough to wait for Carolyn and I to follow him out. And so, as we stepped out of the Freeling Anglican Church into the sun, he extended his hand and said, "Mr. Speaker," and I thought, this is pretty formal. So I wanted to put him at ease. I extended my hand and said, "Neil." He thought it was a command and not my name. And he was more than a bit flummoxed because here we were, church and state, and everything else. No, that's my name. I tell you the story because, you see, I always felt with George Wilson as though I was expected to be a bit deferential. Now, I hope those who knew George well don't find that offensive. I had a great admiration for him. I almost held him in awe, but I was certain that he was much more comfortable if I was remembering my face and he was recognised as being in his. And that's simply part of the character of Nuffield in 1975, because in 1975, when Dale Metcalfe and I, along with a number of others, of course, Peter Gemelli, Lynn Kingsbury from New Zealand, and Doug Ball from New Zealand. Doug might even be known to Nicola, who spoke last night. When we were all arrived in the UK with a Canadian, I had the feeling that Captain John Stewart also thought it would be a good idea if we were just a shade more deferential. And those who knew John may have had that experience as well. And Dale can tell you well that I remember standing at the back of John Stewart's canvas-covered Troopy Land Rover. And we're all about to get in to be tailed off by John. And clearly he was looking at this whole group from the Antipodes and Canada and a bit worried about how they would behave. He recognised that mercifully, at least we all then knew the words of the national anthem because it was God Save the Queen. But he was a bit bothered that we'd struggle with the words, I'm sure, of land and hope and hope and glory, and anxious to kind of get some sort of gentility into this group. So he looked around, as Dale can vouch, and he saw Doug Ball, who was clearly the one who was exercising the most responsibility. And those who have just returned from the Global Focus Group will know what I'm meaning about the sort of camaraderie that exists within the group. And John said, Doug will be the leader. Doug was the leader. I think as Dale will vouch, it was a very wise choice to make. I listened today, and I thought John Stewart, though, and George Wilson, though I may have been in awe of both of them, would be very proud of what has happened to Nuffield, very proud of the presentations that were made today, and that we should all as a group tonight recognise the indebtedness we have not only to George Wilson, but as we have to Ian McIntosh, Harry Perkins, Graham Fox, Brendan Smart, Peter Nixon, David Brownhill, and Chair. And we should recognise that Nuffield in 2012 is not only a very different institution to the institution I knew in 1975, but that more than that. Whereas in 1975, on return, I was running around South Australia with other South Australian Nuffields, principally Trevor Day, when he wasn't a student at that stage, trying to find sponsorship from groups like IFA and convincing them that we get Nuffield scholars to buy a few more tonnes and there would be a few more dollars in it for Nuffield. Today we have sponsors who are here tonight who have recognised what Nuffield can do, who have recognised the opportunity to extend agricultural information as a result of the Nuffield scheme, and we stand indebted to them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am 37 years out of date when it comes to agricultural practice. I still attempt to be a citrus grower in the Riverland, but my wife calls it my folly. And the fact is that in the last 37 years, 21 of them have been spent in the Federal Parliament. And for all of Andrew's generous remarks about giving back, facts are on a retired MP, very well pleased and thanked him by the people of Australia, and very keen to be a part of the Australian, to maintain the Australian community, as I know and love it. So tonight, I'm not going to pretend to talk to you about agricultural practice. Instead, I'm going to ask the question of you, respond to the question of you, what did Nuffield do for me? I came back from Nuffield, and here there's hundreds of other Nuffield scholars have done. I got involved in changing my property, even introduced a little picture home, which I knew was never going to be a resounding success because the population base is too small. It still proved to be an interesting experience. I got involved in rehabilitating properties, repurposing stone fruit. These are the days before Roundup, and so rather like a good GMO crop, I became a Roundup ready because I'd seen it applied in the UK and thought we should be ready to use it in South Australia as well. But what Nuffield most did for me, this is the message I want to leave tonight. Nuffield destroyed the sense of parochialism that I carried with me as a citrus grower from the Riverland in 1975. Now, I'd ask me to be more precise about parochialism. I checked my dictionary. It said to be parochial is to be narrow-minded, not willing to accept new ideas, myopic, not by the way to be confused with misogynist, but you know, myopic. And today, we were, as we are at every Nuffield conference, besieged by people who have long since ceased to be, in any sense, parochial because of what they've seen around the world, long since ceased to be narrow-minded because of what they found they could acquire if they were narrow-minded before they started. Here we were with new ideas, dripping and available to all of us. But, my friends, I sat there today and thought, I'll bet if tonight I stand up and say for 21 of the last 36 years I've been a parliamentarian and I was cured in 1975 of my parochialism, there will be a bit of cynicism in the audience because there's a general view that no one comes more parochial than a parliamentarian in any part of the globe, but especially in Australia. And I guess it is true that in local government particularly there's a good deal of parochialism and it's reflected in the state government. What I want to say to you tonight is that the preparation that I had as part of the Nuffield experience for politics was very helpful, and there were many parallels to draw between my political life and my Nuffield life. And you might find that a bit offensive, so just allow me to elaborate. In my one other political story, to tell you that when we moved from the property 2 years after I was elected to Gawler, the largest centre in the electorate and the most geographically central spot, we moved as a family from a country town where we knew everybody and everyone knew us into the opportunity for the first time in my life and my children's lives to be anonymous. And our oldest son went off to his first year of high school at the local high school. And one day, he had a good class teacher, Mr. Carson Davis. And one day Mr. Davis was sitting down talking to the class, running through the newspaper so they were familiar with current events. And he said, this is what's happening here in this state, this is what's happening somewhere else. But at the end of the presentation he said to the class, don't worry about it. It's only what the politicians are saying, and all politicians are liars. My 13-year-old was struck. He'd never heard his father's profession referred to in that way before. And so to his credit, he waited until the rest of the class had gone, and then he went hesitatingly to Mr. Davis and said, Sir, my dad's a politician and he doesn't tell lies. I can't be sure that now that he's 40 and not 13, he works for the Queensland State Government, he's quite as anxious to vouch for my profession as he was. Mr. Davis was so blown away by this that he went to the staff room, to his credit, picked up the phone, rang my wife and told her what had happened. I tell the story because most Australians would say all politicians are liars. And what I want to register with you tonight is that of course I was compromised in my political life. That's inevitable. But no more compromised than I was in my fruit growing life every time I filled out my tax return. And I want to make the point that taking too parochial a view of politics would have the same fatal consequences as a Nuffield scholar pretending to have had the experience they have and still returning with a parochial view. Most of the time that I felt in Parliament, in opposition and in government, something worthwhile was being advocated, it was something that was unpopular. It was something that was non-parochial. It was something that was new. And it was usually being resisted by the elector. It was difficult to get the elector to see outside of their own comfort zone. Let me illustrate that. I sat there in opposition in the mid-80s when Prime Minister Hawke and Treasurer Keating introduced the trade and tariff changes that were frankly so essential for Australia. But they would never have passed a referendum. They were basically undemocratic. I sat there in government when Howard and Costello changed the tax scheme. And I doubt that that would have passed a referendum. And furthermore, it was complicated by other changes to the waterfront, many of which would have been popular with this audience, but not popular with the general public and easily misrepresented, but they were pursued. So for those who say that the Australian Federal Parliament lacks a vision, should get on with a new Snowy Mountain scheme, should find something to do beyond the parochial view people have imposed on the Parliament, I say, you know that in politics, my most difficult task was getting the electorate not to be parochial rather than expecting the Parliament not to be parochial. I've used these remarks because, and I hope Kim and Marilyn Kelly don't mind this comment, because the most colourful and most effective member for Wakefield in the life, perhaps with the exception of Charles Walker, but in the life of the electorate of Wakefield was unquestionably Kim's father, Bert. Bert Kelly, the first Nuffield scholar from Australia to the UK. Bert Kelly, the man who stood up for doing whatever he believed was right and proper. Bert Kelly, who refused to be parochial on any issue, and it would be fair to say Bert Kelly, who finally lost his seat after almost 20 years in the Parliament because he refused simply to do what the electorate demanded. Bert said we should be about tariff reform. Bert was a member of the coalition, and at Bert's funeral, Gough Whitlam, as the former Prime Minister, stood up and said, no backbencher in the life of the Australian Parliament has as effectively changed the policy of this Parliament as Bert Kelly, former Nuffield scholar. Man who learned to be non-parochial and to pursue an issue that may not be the issue the electorate wanted. Sometimes the obligation that parliamentarians face is frankly not to do what the electorate wants them to do. Most people think, if I'm your elected representative, I should be doing whatever you believe ought to be done. That wasn't Bert's view. Bert took the Edmund Burke view, which was your representative owes you, and pardon me, this is in the his, because it was, of course, in the 18th century, Edmund Burke, your representative owes you not only his industry, but his judgment. And he betrays you instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. Electors of Australia, there are occasions when you should expect your Parliament to do what it believes has to be done rather than what the electorate may want it to do. I make that comment because last night I listened to what, as you all did, I listened to the comments of Professor John Williams. Known John for a long time, have a great respect for him. But I thought that when John said at the end of his remarks that as the NDP plan was about to be announced, and of course it was announced this morning, the 3,250 figure, as it was about to be announced, he said, I believe we should let the people decide. Sorry, John. Of all of the issues that I would be reluctant to throw into the political ring for a popular decision, water would be top of the list. Can you imagine how we would ever get the states to agree on a particular water agenda? I mean, Dave Riley, Jason Size and myself are all here tonight has driven our irrigators. Some of the water that we get has already been through Jim George. There's bound to be some dispute about what happens to water across this nation. And I think we need to say, who are the best informed people? Let them make a decision, let the Parliament legislate that, and we, the electors, have the right every 3 years to pass judgment on that decision rather than making a parochial decision in the short term. Now, water's a classic one. But I would throw into the ring the issue of what do we do with refugees or asylum seekers as we try to find the appropriate rate for them to assimilate in Australia. Weed Export Authority, my friends, how would you like the Parliament to legislate on that? Could it be done on a popular or an informed basis? I've been sitting on the side of David Brown, we're going to have a lively discussion about coal seam gas on exactly the same parameters. So I put it to you tonight. There has to be a point at which the Parliament, just like the Nuffield organisation, says we will access all the information we can, make a decision as courageously as we can, and let the people ultimately pass judgment on us. What we need is information. What Nuffield offers is just that. And what we need is the capacity to distill, discern and discriminate through that information in order to make a decision. In fact, to quote a well-known USA Senator, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and a quote that's been probably well worn lately, you are entitled to your opinion, but not entitled to your facts. We need everybody's facts. Nuffield collects everybody's facts in order for Nuffield scholars to be able to make an informed decision about what they believe they can do on their properties and encourage their neighbours to do as well. Now, Andrew Johnson, in the remarks he was making this afternoon, said that he found a quote that suggested that the future was going to be in farming. Financial advisors would be simply looking for a spot on a farm while farmers were driving around on their Lamborghinis because of the demand that was about to emerge for food and water and principally primary-based supplies. Well, it is true. As we all know, and we've heard not only over the last couple of days, but over an extended period of time, in 13 years, there will be 1 billion more mouths to feed on this earth. Wheat production alone needs to rise by 1.6% per annum through to 2025 to do just that. We face the challenge of another green revolution. Just like the green revolution that under Norman Borlaug took Indian wheat crops from 10 million tonnes to 70 million tonnes. That's the challenge. And we have to do it. Unlike Norman Borlaug, we have to do it with less water, with less land because of the demand for biofuels, and with fewer rainforests rightly unable to be filled. So how are we going to go about using the right resources and the right information to feed the world? Well, I want to put it to you, my friend, that the answer is probably not in corporate farming. Not because I'm unhappy about corporate farming, or successful family farms, or large family farms, but because those properties already maximise their production and minimise their input. The challenge we face in feeding the world is that we need to reach 1 billion subsistence farms, many of whom are women. And these are people who, by reason of their lifestyle, cannot be risk-taking. What they have available to them is next year's food supply. And if they take a risk and it fails, they starve. They are unable to take those chances. So how do we go about reaching these people? And the answer, I believe, is we replicate what Nuffield has so successfully done since 1950. In fact, you might be encouraged to know that the UK-based research organisation CABI, supported by ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, It is currently part of a knowledge bank that's expanding information to subsistence farmers across the Horn of Africa. 180,000 farmers have been reached by this knowledge bank using email, mobile phones, whatever techniques available to reach local communities and have the local communities and the informed farmers encourage their neighbours to do what will be more productive, what has been tested, what has been found to be reliable, and information that is applicable. Sound familiar to you? It should. In many ways it is Nuffield replicated in a way that works because these people can't travel, but they need this very information. You could accuse these farmers, of course, of being parochial, of being reluctant to change. But in fact, they are the people who are unable to embrace new ideas for lack of information. They are the people who need a reliable information source, which means that they can experience just what we've experienced in today's exchange. And this information has the capacity to increase production dramatically because in many cases it's not just a matter of finding an appropriate seed source, it's also a matter of finding a way to minimise the 40 or 50% of seed production in third world countries, developing countries, currently being lost in production, in storage and in retail. The ACR reported, and I don't know whether our Nuffield friends with Indian experience can vouch for this, but one of the things that encouragingly had happened in India has been the emergence of cooperative supermarket chains which had allowed Indian peasant farmers to have some storage through the refrigeration that was provided as part of the retail market chain. In 1975, when I left for the UK, I made a dreadful parochial mistake. I believed I lived where the rest of the world would want to be. I was proud of where I was. I was proud of what I enjoyed as a Riverland fruit grower with empire preference, so that I get my fruit to the UK more cheaply than the Spaniards. But I discovered when I got there that there was no room for that sort of parochialism. If I was in fact to discover something worthwhile, it wasn't me going overseas with information, but me going overseas to soak up facts and return with them for Australian farmers. I may have felt regimented by John Stewart. I may have been grateful for the commitment, and I was, of George Wilson, but I quickly found that I had a great deal to learn from my counterparts overseas. Just the information that every Nuffield scholar has also found in their time overseas. So, we are about information exchange. It's what the world needs. It's the only way we can possibly hope to spread prosperity and foster world harmony. Anything else will fail.